Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of A Piece of Cake with our brother who is back on the shores of England, UK. And so please introduce yourself, my brother.
There's Abdurraheem Green, of course, in the right-hand corner. And the left-hand corner is, of course, the esteemed Dr.
Abdul Haqq Baker with you again. And we are looking today, Abdurraheem, at something, a huge topic. I'm not sure if we're going to get through it today, but we will endeavor to. And if not, we will continue with it on identity. And those who saw the poster for it and the colors and everything like that, don't look too deeply into it. We're colorful.
I was just looking at it, bro, and realizing that I think from that poster, you and me identify as being 25 years old instead of being getting into our 60s or whatever it is.
No, not yet 60s. Yeah. Close. But no, Abdurraheem, I think the subject of identity is one that is going to continue to be front and center for a number of years, looking at where we are and compared to where we were the last decade, the decade before, historically. And I want to just start off by reading a particular, a short excerpt of a book that a brother has written, a Dr. Asif Hirani, Islamic versus Postmodern Paradigm of Sexuality, because it's a key thing that he says here. And why has sex become an identity instead of an action? In the Islamic or biblical sense, sex was something we did, but today it is considered part of who we are.
Yeah.
And I think this is an important aspect here, because I would say we're talking about identity. My name is Abdul Haqq Baker, born Anthony Baker. Okay, father from Nigeria, mother from South America, Guyana, formerly British Guyana. Okay. I'm Afropean, as I like to term myself, which encapsulates European, Caribbean, and the Afro side of my identity. I'm heterosexual, and I'm a male. I'm one of the two genders that I know about and the world has known about since I was born. Now, I want to say very carefully here, because this is a very sensitive topic. We know that there are those who want to jump on those of us who still adhere to binary genders in that regard. And we see what's taking place in the world and the dichotomy and the conflict and everything like that. And I want to make it really clear that however others identify themselves, we as Muslims, Orthodox Muslims or otherwise, will not, should not castigate with a view to harming anyone. That's not our dawah. That's not what we are about. But that, unfortunately, is what is attached to any disagreement in the wider debate around gender and the like. So I'm making that really clear. So no one, you deny or you reject something, or you say this is not what I agree with, and you are phobic towards that thing you disagree with. And I want us to be really clear that we are talking about identity. And we're talking historically, contemporarily, and we are not going to go down the road of slating, demonizing, castigating, but we are going to focus on identity from a religious perspective. If we need to go down a physiological perspective, scientific perspective, then these are going to be discussed unashamedly and abashedly on the basis of focusing on the topic. So I've just said who I am. This is who I am. This is my background. This is what are the facts regarding myself. So you, Abdurraheem, what was your name beforehand? How are you described scientifically, factually, by virtue of who you are?
I don't think about it much. I used to a lot. But for me, the question of my identity was more in the context of the struggle against my ego. So we've had this conversation before, right? We've had this same conversation. So I think there's no harm in me repeating it. I realized I did sort of click quite a while ago, and this is since I became Muslim, that we didn't call it white privilege, right? Because the term didn't really exist. But I sort of recognized that within myself there was a feeling of superiority because I was white and British, middle class, public school educated, very much linked to, race, national identity, empire, all of those things that came with it. Deep within inside me, I understood that I had been indoctrinated with a belief system that I knew was wrong, that I knew was against what God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, has revealed. So it wasn't a struggle for my identity. It was just realizing that there was something about the way I identified myself subconsciously and inwardly that needed to be corrected. And I won't even claim that I've succeeded to do that, but at least I can, at least I've acknowledged it's there, and I need to do something about it. As for the rest of it, I don't, it's such an interesting subject because the whole topic of identity, it's not a new subject for us, Abdul Haqq, bro. We've been talking about this forever.
Yes.
Right. And obviously we've been talking about it forever in respect to, what does it mean to identify yourself as a Muslim? What is the Muslim identity? Does a Muslim have a particular distinct identity?
Yes.
There's no doubt that we've always realized, ever since I've known you, we've been giving talks together, that the Muslims are suffering collectively an identity crisis.
That's right.
What does it mean to be part of the Ummah? What does it even mean to be Muslim? Remember that talk I used to give? What does it mean to be Muslim?
Yes, I remember that talk very well.
For many people, being Muslim was just a sort of cultural, it's like it's a culture thing, right? Like you eat chapatis and you eat biryani, you're a Muslim. It wasn't, unfortunately, really much deeper than that.
Yeah.
So that obviously was highly problematic because Islam is about making a choice fundamentally. That's it. Everyone has to make that choice. You and me, we reverted to Islam. Our choice is obvious in your face. You can't hide it. But every Muslim at some stage needs to make that choice.
Right.
Right. That I was talking to a sister recently who, she was talking about her choice to wear hijab and her choice to take a big step in the direction of being more overtly practicing her religion. It's a choice. She had to make a choice, right? My wife had to make a choice in her life, whether she was going to go this way or that way, right? And she's incredibly comfortable with her identity as a niqabi wearing, where she hasn't changed. Nothing has changed her. She's incredibly comfortable with it. So I think for us, it's not a new subject in the broad sense,
right?
In the broad sense. But I think that quote, bro, hit the nail on the head. And the thing is that it's one of those things that I think we as Muslims are still sort of baffled with, and this is generally, I think, across most of the Muslim world. No one really get what on earth is going on here. Like, what is this obsession with sex? Right? I mean, sex is all good and fun and whatever. And yeah, it's, no one's denying it's fun, but come on, seriously, it's not like what life is about. But I guess when you don't know what your purpose of life is, and you don't realize that you have been created for a very specific purpose, you're just going to run with whatever you can. I think that's what's going on here, right? But for the Muslims, they're sort of flat. They don't get it. They don't get this obsession with sexual identity. And, it is just so far removed from the way that Muslims think. It is quite baffling, I think, to most ordinary Muslims.
And It's very, very true. That not only to Muslims, we're seeing faith-led, the Abrahamic faiths on the same page.
Of course,
that it cannot be according to sexual preference or preference in that way that we identify. Okay, and we're not going to stick on that issue in and of itself. Because I think what you said about what you've looked at with regards to your own identity, the challenges I've had with regards to identity issues, looking at myself as a Black British individual in the UK, a country that's my own, in which I've grown, but what has been done and what we've been subjected to institutionally, systemically, what's happened to my ethnicities from the point of racism and colonialism. All of these are huge constructs and aspects that we have to grapple with. But as you said, in the context that we're living in today, there are other dynamics that we're having to consider. And if we consider,
you know, one of the things I've always wanted to ask, bro, in this topic, because I feel this, right, not as an individual who's personally affected by it, but I feel that, how does it feel as a Black person, right, a person of color, who has, and I know because we've talked about it, who has suffered genuinely horrific, and not just you as an individual, but as a community, right? And I was listening to the Empire podcast, and William Dalrymple and Anita, I can't remember her name, but they've been talking about slavery. That's the whole topic at the moment. They're doing a whole series now on slavery, and they've just reached now the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. Well, that's where I've reached. They may have gone ahead from that. That's where I've got to in the podcast. The sheer horror of that, and the scale of it, the thing is, they contrasted it with the history of slavery in the world, and the fact is there was just nothing like it in history.
Exactly.
The sheer industrial scale, and the fact that it had a racial element, and the fact that there was no way out. In almost all other slave societies, there was some way out for slaves. There was some way for them to become free, to become citizens. Rome, for example, was a slave society, but slaves could be set free and become citizens. There was nothing like that for Black slaves in
that's right.
Nothing like that.
Abdurraheem, so that question.
Sorry, let me finish, bro. So sorry, because I'm just going on. So just, that's fine. You just cut me, and I'll get to the point. I'm going to
go on.
I apologize. Yeah. No. So I'm just. Why am I painting this picture? Because I'm painting a picture of real levels of human misery on a mass scale. How can? Don't you feel that has been hijacked? Not only hijacked and sidelined, and this is the main thing, hijacked and sidelined a real issue about which you can do nothing, right? Because I don't care what people say, you can control your sexual urges. You can choose to have sex with another man or not. You may say you're born gay, but you can choose not to do that. But you cannot choose to be Black or not. You don't have a choice, bro, right? And so to compare the two things, to put them even remotely in the same category, to be honest, I find sickening beyond belief. And I just don't understand why there is not more outrage, and why people like you are not screaming from the rooftops, how dare you hijack such an issue that is so serious for one of essentially what really is, by and large, a lifestyle choice. And I'm not saying that gay people don't suffer discrimination and have problems, and there's suicides, and I know all of this with the transgender, and people confused and whatever. It's not. I don't wish it upon anyone. I want the best for everybody. Both you and I would wish the best for everybody, and for everyone to live a happy, fulfilled life. But it's like chalk and cheese to me. It's like, I don't, I find, this is what I find really, this is one of the things I find really genuinely disturbing, for example.
No, Abdurraheem, that's some very profound points there that you've made. I want to touch upon one aspect. It's something not having the choice to be black, you haven't meant it in that way, but some have brought that same question, and I want to throw it back out there. None of us have a choice of what colors we are, but I want you to be clear that we as black people, and we use the term black as because we've owned that term now, many of us, we're very proud and honored and privileged to be black. There is black privilege, okay? There is black privilege, but it's within a specific purview that black people acknowledge it, white people acknowledge it in their deference to black culture and everything else that we see in appropriation and emulation and the like. So, yeah, it's not a default, it's not a negative aspect. And I know that you're not inferring that it is.
No, not at all.
I know.
Not in the slightest.
When it comes to screaming from the rooftops, you know my website, you know my writings. Yes, I bring this to the fore a lot of the time, that every single time blackness is referred to and addressed, and the oppression that has been done in that regard, it's diluted or marginalized because other causes have attached themselves to this very long-standing, robust and resilient movement. And it started, we saw it in the civil rights in the 60s. Martin Luther King and the others, and Malcolm X, we saw them pushing and directing. And then these other causes said, let's jump on with you to strengthen you and you, but more so you will strengthen us. And that's still taking place today. Okay, even other ethnicities will put themselves, if they were brown, and this used to happen with the South Asian community up until the 80s, late 80s, when they found their voice around the Salman Rushdie affair. The Muslims then became more distinct, but up until that time, the South Asian community usually rallied together. When there was racism taking place, and they felt that they were at the brunt of it, then they called themselves black and then enlisted the assistance of the black community. So you're right in what you're saying. And then we've got these movements now, the transgender movements and these other movements. So you hear the BAME movements, and you'll see that when speaking about minorities and you talk about black people, you'll see that all these other movements are named alongside that. Okay,
this is the thing.
But then when we look at other faith, and I'm going to move to this in a I think a historical and factual context, we don't see that with the Jewish communities. Okay, we don't see that so much with the Jewish communities, and you've got to acknowledge that if the effectiveness of their campaigning pressure groups in highlighting what they've endured. And I want to stick with that for a moment, because what's happened there, and again, just to confirm the power of what they're saying and their stance and their position societally, eugenics, the horrific so-called science of eugenics, which prioritized the white race as being the most superior, the black race as the most inferior, and we had Carl Pearson and all these other individuals. I'm reading about them now, and I've read about them in the past. The only time they moved away from eugenics and the evil of eugenics was after what was witnessed in the Holocaust, because you had scientists who had sided with Nazi Germany, and you had Hitler quoting American scientists, geneticists, and British geneticists who were speaking in support of this racial, scientific racism, this hierarchy. And it only stopped because of what happened in the Holocaust, as it should have stopped. The point that I'm making, that should have stopped and died in the water because of what happened with transatlantic slavery. And as you highlighted, Abdurraheem, others have tried to dilute transatlantic slavery to say there's always been slavery in the world. But to date, there has not been any form of slavery as horrific as transatlantic slavery, where black people were bred, we were forced to breed with the treatment that was there. And as you said, there was absolutely no outlet in that particular instance. And just reading Abdul Malik's, he's saying these conversations have been had amongst the black community, Brother Abdurraheem. And yes, Abdul Malik is absolutely right. It is being had. What I would say in that instance, which saddens me to an extent, I don't know if Abdul Malik would agree with this, And salams to our brothers and sisters, Shireen and others who've made some very good contributions. Unfortunately, we have some of our co-religionists, and I've spoken to this before, black co-religionists, who do not like us discussing these aspects because they say we should only be looking at Islam and there's no color incidents or things to deal with in Islam. And I say, well, hold on a minute, because before today, there's racism amongst the Muslims. And as you know, the racism that I experienced after embracing Islam is worse than the racism that I received from wider society and a number of black Afropean.
Let me just anyone who's saying that needs to refresh themselves and remember that racism existed in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Abu Dar, if you remember, right, called Bilal, "You son of a black woman," right? When Bilal went to tell the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he say? Oh no, let's just worry about Islam and this and that. And no, he called Abu Dar. He said, there is still jahiliyyah in you. There is still jahiliyyah in you, right? And he put his face on the ground. He wouldn't lift it until Bilal had trodden on his face, right? This is him. This is his, killing his nafs, right?
That's right.
Killing the jahiliyyah in himself. So that's just ridiculous. Whoever says that is not true, right?
Yeah.
Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam dealt with it as an example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam dealing with racism, not letting it go, right? Not letting it pass. And it's something that needs to be rooted out. I mean, I think that the point that I was the point that I was trying to make, maybe a bit clumsily, I know you know, but I did not mean to imply like there was something wrong with being black, or it was like that's not.
No, I know.
That's absolutely not my intention. But it just shows that even in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was this racism, there was this attitude to people of color, right? That some people had that was just ignorant. It was just not based on anything. So it's something that we find in different cultures, and we know it in Indian culture, right? We've talked about this a lot. So the point that I'm really trying to make is that this is something that is really intrinsic and serious. It's not because it's what I'm trying to say is it goes back to some really key fundamental points about what does it mean to be human, right? What does it mean to be a human being? What is the purpose of life? What really is the commonality between all of us? And it's nothing to do with the color of our skin, right? So I think I guess the other problem is that these are things that genuinely divide human society upon totally false and fictitious fault lines. However, that is not the case with sex. And the reason is very simple, because for the vast majority of human history, sex primarily, as enjoyable as it is used for procreation. And the enjoyment of sex is fundamentally a bonding mechanism that allows couples and encourages them to stay together to produce and raise children. And raising children is extremely difficult and it's extremely challenging. And for the most part of human history, we have suffered from a massive underpopulation problem, not an overpopulation problem, right? Human beings, by and large, have struggled to have enough of us around to make life pleasant and comfortable. That's been, by and large, the struggle of humanity. So it's inbuilt into us. And the restrictions on sexual behavior are there for a very, very important social function and social reason. Now, maybe we could have a discussion about, in some environment, and I'm not talking from a religious point of view, I'm just talking from a, sociological point of view. Well, what does that mean in the world today? Blah, 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 right? But none of that changes the fact is that, we are hardwired as human beings, because we are communal animals. We're not animals, but we are creatures, is the right word I want to use, that live in societies. It's not just about you as an individual, how you feel as an individual. That is not the only thing that is taken into consideration. That's why we have laws that limit your freedom
Yes.
of what you can do and what you can say. You can't just go around saying, well, I feel like a rapist today, or I feel like a murderer today, or I feel like a psychopath today, right? And just go and do whatever you like. That's what the whole basis of civilization is that you can't just do what you like. You have to learn to regulate your impulses for the benefit of human beings living in a successful society. And sex
Absolutely.
always has been a huge part of that regulation. It
Right.
always has been a huge part of how we need to regulate ourselves to be successful. This is why it is not the same topic as race. It is completely, totally different. And it is absolutely not right that anyone should try and piggyback off, that issue, because they're very, very different issues, bro. Profoundly different issues, right?
And what you're saying, absolutely, thank you, Jazakallah khair, Abdurraheem, and the comments that are coming, I think, are very important. The individual, thanks for your comments. The Holy Spirit talking about the Arab slave trade. We're not talking about durations of slave trades. We're talking about the barbarity of the transatlantic slave trade. We're talking about the inherited trauma that comes with that. As you've got inherited wealth, as I've mentioned many times before, we've got inherited wealth, the reparations that are being discussed now. It was the slave.
Hey bro, can I just what was the comment about the Arab slave trade? What was that?
There's a comment that the duration of the Arab slave trade that ended in 1960. So it was.
Bro, look, okay, so I want to make this point to that person, right? I challenge this person to go and study who are the Mamelukes. Who were the Mamelukes? Go and see.
Former slaves.
Right? The Mamelukes were slaves, and they were the rulers of Egypt. In fact, they were rulers of a large part of the Middle East. They were the rulers. The rulers, for God's sake, subhanallah, right? That's the point. The nature of what it meant to be a slave in the Muslim society was totally different. I encourage you to go and listen to that podcast, Empire Podcast, because Dalrymple and I can't remember Nita's second name, but they go through all of these different stages of human slavery. They did it very cleverly to on purpose illustrate the difference, right? Yes, but the thing was, because there is no racism in Islam, and I'm not saying there are not Muslims who are racist, of course there are, but right. Islam as a religion is very clear. There is no difference, as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, there is no difference between the white and the black, between the Arab and the non-Arab, except in piety, except in how devoted you are to God. That's the only difference. God looks at the heart, not the color of your skin. These are the things that Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, taught us. This is what the Quran tells us, right? So the point being is that there's not a racial element to it. And that is why that you could have people like the Mamelukes, you could have people who were slaves who became rulers of the society. Either they were former slaves or sometimes they were still slaves and they were still rulers, right? You can see the whole dynamic is different. That is not ever what was possible for one moment in the transatlantic slave trade when Europeans enslaved black people. Do not dare compare the two things, or you can dare, but you'll just be ignorant. You're just being ignorant, right? And you're being prejudiced as well. Right, that's it. Because seriously, wake up. I think, if you call the Holy Spirit, it's obviously not the Holy Spirit that's talking to you, because the Holy Spirit would fill you with actual knowledge, not bigotry and misguidance, So I think people need to get these things. No one's denying that there was that everywhere had slaves. There was just the way the world was, but the world had never seen what happened before in history, as far as we know. Right.
That's right. And Abdurraheem, to emphasize the point there,
that's the point.
The term black, as you know, was a commodified term in order to enslave, label, demarcate product, which is what we became, our forefathers became, product from the rest of humankind. And I was touching upon the point that the effects of that have been proven in our generations, our parents' generations, that inherited trauma, as well as inherited poverty. Haiti was the first land and peoples to free themselves in defeating the French from slavery.
Yep.
But they were crippled with a debt that was not paid, could not be paid off until the early or mid 20th century. They were not allowed to prosper and grow as a people, and we only have to look at Haiti now. They're resilient, but we just got to look at society. So that inherited trauma is something that many Black people in the West and elsewhere carry within our identity. The sense of belonging and the battling with the sense of belonging in societies that we live in is something that is ongoing. So I know we're talking now about ethnicity, but I want to join it back to what you've said here. Those who've joined their causes, and there was a statement there that, let's be clear, some say, oh, Black people should stop claiming victimhood. Let's be clear, Black people are not claiming victimhood, but what we're showing is a resilience and a rejection of continued labeling and particular compartmentalizing in society, a society that continues to have apparatus from colonialism, from slavery, that are intrinsic in their racism, recognizing whiteness,
absolutely,
while marginalizing Blackness, and anyone in between can navigate to various degrees at a level above Blackness. So when you're bringing in other things concerning gender and saying we're the same, but we're all victims and we need to stand together.
We have the same struggle. No, it's not the same struggle. It is not the same struggle.
This is incorrect.
How dare you?
Exactly.
How dare you?
That's something that needs to be spoken about a lot more, because it's happening. And we're speaking about a subject that many are cowed to speak about, because we know that there's an ideology there. There's a fascist liberalism that's there, where tolerance is called for, but there's intolerance of anyone who does not agree, who does not subscribe to a particular narrative. And it's really important that we say, we can have that discussion, but if we disagree, then we should not be labeled as bigoted and all of the whatever phobic that is thrown upon. And we're not just talking about Muslims now. We're talking about those who are speaking and saying, we do not accept particular ideologies. And fine, do as you wish, as you said, there's no issue there. But the imposition through curricula, through state-sanctioned apparatus to impose upon our children, removing the choice that we have to be parents of our children, these are things that should be challenged, need to be challenged, and we should not be castigated for that. And this is a problem.
Or else, what does it mean? What does freedom of religion mean if it doesn't mean that you are free to practice the moral guidelines that your religion lays down?
Exactly.
Do you mean you're just free to mutter some words and make some movements and do a bit of fasting? Because that's not fundamentally what religion is about. Religion is fundamentally about guidelines as to what is right and what is wrong, and about how you should behave and how you should live your life.
Absolutely.
Right? It's about self-regulation. It's about self-regulation. You have a set of rules through which and by which you regulate yourself. And anyone who knows ABC of psychology and understands what makes a human being fundamentally a successful human being in life, it's your ability to self-regulate. And the better you are at regulating yourself and controlling yourself and resisting your impulses, just generally the better you're going to do in life. And the worse you are at doing that, the worse you're going to do in life. So religion gives you a very clear framework of self-regulation. This is why it's very, very important. If you take away that and you say, well, you know, even if you undermine it a little bit, if you just say, well, yeah, okay, you can regulate yourself in all of these things, but not when it comes to sexuality or whatever, who you can have sex with. But then, well, why? You're going to say, why? If I don't regulate myself according to that, well, why should I regulate myself according to this or that or any other thing, by the way, then, right? And it's really scary when you think that something that is so fundamental, something that is so like, this is basic stuff. This is fundamental, male, female, right? And I'm not failing to recognize that there are people with gender dysphoria. Of course, Ilyas has come and he's talked about that before, right? It's not that we don't recognize that these things are there, but they can't be considered normative or accepted as normative. And it's even more scary to think that you can't even now suggest to someone that there might be a solution for it so that they could think in a normative way, because then you're accused of trying to give them conversion therapy or something like that.
Yes.
This is scary beyond belief. And you're hearing things now in Canada, in places that if parents take their kids off to Egypt, where apparently if they have this confusion about their sexuality, there's a sort of 96% success rate, you'll get arrested when you come back. So whose children are they?
Absolutely.
When you say freedom of religion, what do you even mean then? What
Yeah.
does freedom of religion mean if it doesn't mean I must be free to live my life and raise my children according to my beliefs? And my beliefs, part of what it does is dictate the morals, dictates my values, dictates what is correct and incorrect behavior in respect. One of the major things is how you behave sexually, whether it's homosexuality, whether it's sex outside of marriage, whether it's some particular type of sexual activities like anal sex or whatever. I'm just saying some things that within Islam, there may be other religions that I'm sure they have other guidelines, or maybe they don't, but I'm sure they all have some type of, system of regulation. And the crazy thing is that traditionally Christianity, of course, has almost frowned upon sex altogether. The ideal state for most of Christian history was celibacy. This is the crazy thing, right? And then we're told British values, it's British values to be tolerant of this. What are you talking about? What in the last 20, you can't have values that just turned up in the last 20, 30 years, and you're ignoring 2,000 years of British history. Yes. I went to a flipping monastic boarding school, bro. You went to a Catholic school run by monks, people who had chosen to live celibate lives. There was a time when huge numbers of the population lived in monasteries and lived a life of celibacy. That was considered the right way to live.
And that's a good point, Abdurraheem, because even in Islam, Allah speaks about this, that was an extreme to another extent.
Yeah.
And I think what we're looking at and discussing here is that the elevating feelings and emotion above all else. Everything is about how you feel, and you are allowed to enact whatever those feelings are. However, when we look at, for example, Shireen has mentioned a really good point, and to Hassan, if you can put up the last point from Shireen as well. When we are looking at children and raising our children, we do not allow them, we nurture them to not just behave according to their feelings. Okay, some will come back with a counter argument and say, but it's not just about feelings, it's about consent. Children do not have the maturity levels to understand particular aspects of when to consent and when not to consent. And when it comes to feelings, we know there are regulations, as you've mentioned. For example, with regards to the age of the limit for alcohol, the age limit for alcohol, the age limit of consensual sex. Okay, if your son at 5 years or 7 years old said, I'm going to the off license, I want to get myself some alcohol, the law wouldn't allow it. If the child was 12 years old and said, I want to be in a full sexual relationship, the law wouldn't allow it. However,
Well, at the moment,
when it comes at the moment, you're right. When it comes to major decisions with regards to the identity based on feelings, they not only facilitate, but your child can be removed from your household as a result of that. The normalization of things that we should question, are they normal or abnormal? And don't get me wrong, if it's abnormal and there are those who are practicing or subscribing to that, no, we don't chastise, we don't target or anything like that. But to try and impose upon the rest of society that this is normal is where the problem starts coming, because we have.
I think
With this, I'll finish on this point. We have societal frameworks, we have historical context and backdrop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
that's what I was going to pick up on.
They can't all just be thrown into by the wayside for something that has never existed historically, societally, as the raison d'etre, as the norm, if I can say. So we're looking at some very dangerous societal constructs.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that Western society is always suffering from these crisis of identity crisis, and it's a product of its own making. So I think, this is very interesting when you're talking about the historical context. Let's look at basically one of the things that has happened, and you and I will remember Jeremy Thorpe. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, remember him, and all the jokes about Jeremy Thorpe, and he was the leader of the Liberal Party.
That's right.
He was homosexual. It seemed he was a homosexual and got caught, in a homosexual relationship, and that his career ended. Right. So homosexuality, being a homosexual, was used for years to blackmail people, to get people to turn into spies. A lot of people in the secret services were homosexual because they used it as something to actually blackmail them. So they couldn't just, leak secrets, because then we'll leak your secret, right? So the thing is that this particular, orientation has been used historically in the West to blackmail people. Now, it's interesting again that I keep on going about William Dalrymple's podcast, but very interesting. He's talking about one of the Ottoman caliphs who pretty much seems that he was, had a full-flung gay relationship with one of his, his top advisor, right? But anyways, it seems that was what was going on, but no one could accuse him of that. No one could say anything. No one could do anything, because what's the consequence? You make a false accusation and you accuse someone of being a homosexual or fornicating or committing adultery, right? And you don't have the requisite number of trustworthy witnesses. You're going to be publicly humiliated, and your testimony will never be accepted again, right? So these sort of things that, and it's not just enough to have some pictures or some, it's the point being is that these things have existed in Muslim societies. There's no doubt about it, and still do, but they exist in a very sort of covert way. And it's not something that people can come along and blackmail you with, because the crime of accusing someone falsely without proof, right, is the consequences are terrible for doing that. So the thing is, it just, in a way, it really just shows us the wisdom of what Islam has brought, and the wisdom of the Sharia, and the wisdom of the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a lot of these things, I believe, are just a consequence of a system that is fundamentally flawed and fundamentally corrupt. And I don't say all of this, by the way, to say, yeah, it's okay to be gay in a Muslim society. and you know, it's considered to be a sin. But the point being is that whether it's an affair that a person is having or committing adultery or whatever, there's things that people do secretly and covertly, and they hide, and what, no one is coming looking for them, rooting them out, witch hunting, you know, hunting gays down, let's expose them, this and that. This is not allowed at all in an Islamic society.
That's
As
right.
because the Quran says, "La jassasu," you do not spy on each other, and you do not fault find with each other, and you do not go looking out, finding out people's faults and trying to expose their sins. Right? It's only in the extremely rare case where people are openly doing so openly that it's almost in public view, then that's not tolerated.
Right.
Right? That's the stuff that's going to get you in trouble. Right? So the thing is that, and when I say in trouble, I mean in trouble legally. I don't mean in trouble with Allah, right? That's a different thing, right? We're talking about spiritually, that's a different thing. But we're talking about preserving the moral norms of society that are essential in order for society to prosper and thrive. Because this is really, what else is the point of having societies? What is the point of a civilization, right? It's so that people can prosper and survive. And there are certain paradigms that need to be in place. And when they're not, the society will collapse.
Exactly.
And what will come from that is horrific. And we are seeing it right in front of our eyes. Is it just a coincidence, Abdul Haqq, that along with all of this rise in identity politics and this and that, there is more violence, there is more suicide, there is more crime, it's just becoming worse and worse.
Mental health, not knowing who you are, okay, and not having a framework of knowing who you are, except that you base that on feelings, is not a firm foundation at all. For example, when we look, everyone knows that ayat in Surah Hujurat, we made you into tribes. This is Allah telling us, He made us into tribes and nations that we may know each other. Allah speaks in the Quran concerning the mother of Maryam, when she dedicated the child in her womb in Surah Ali Imran to the worship of Allah when the child is born. And she had a perception of the gender of that child. And when the child was born, she supplicated to Allah, and she said, because she was surprised it was a female, and she said, and the woman is not like the man. Just that statement. This is, no one can say, oh, what is Abdul Haqq saying? This is in the Quran. And the woman is
not like the female,
the male is not like the female. So now, when we're looking at that, and I think that's what Shireen was highlighting earlier on, we're now looking at a stage, and we're looking at things where people are questioning, what is a woman? What denotes a woman?
I don't think most people are questioning that. Like,
no, I'm saying no, but you're not most people. I'm saying that question is being raised, and there's a document. There's I can't remember his name. You would have seen it, and you're saying to yourself, hold on a minute. When has that become a question? What is a woman?
And the thing is, Matt Walsh. And the thing is, it has implications, bro. It has huge implications for us, right? Because what is happening is our daughters, I mean, and this is the crazy thing, is that is that here in the West, women have fought so hard just to be recognized.
Yes.
Right?
And they're still fighting.
To get inheritance, to have separate bathrooms, to have facilities, their own sports, all of these things, so that they can participate in society in a way that is appropriate to them. Because it's all works under the supposition that there is a difference between men and women. And therefore, women need to have accommodation made for them in many different ways. And by the way, we haven't even got close to how women should really be accommodated for, in my opinion, right? It's not even close. Like, I mean, you can go to Gulf countries and you see how well women are accommodated for, and whatever stereotypes you want to give about, gilded cages and this and that, absolute nonsense, right? Okay. Women are very, very, they are catered for, right? So we haven't even got, but what this whole thing is being undermined. So like you hear videos popping up on my social media where girls are saying, mothers are saying, do not let your daughter, your young daughter, go into the toilet on her own, right? When you go to the park, when you go to the service station, do not let her, because there could be a man in that female toilet who has claimed he identifies as a woman. And what happens? He molests her, he rapes her. And this is not just this is stuff that is actually happening.
In
We are
prison,
hearing
female
this.
prison. We've seen the cases. The
It's
cases.
madness, absolute
They've gone
madness.
in
It's
and
absolute madness.
they've raped women.
Abs-
So you're absolutely right in that, and I think that what we need to look at in this instance, and again, I think as we're drawing to a conclusion, we're not advocating, suggesting for one moment that there's an ostracization, a targeting, or anything like that. As you said, you've shown how Islam accommodates difference in Muslim societies. The burden of proof that needs to be brought if accusations are going to be made in any of lewdness or in this particular context. And that's why guidance frameworks that are established societally, irrespective of religion in this particular instance, is something that we need to really push out. Zamzam, Sister Sams, you're right regarding the children aspect and everything. Where is the safety? And the parameters for safety are being defined by society and not by us. And I'm talking about this change in this respect here. So it's really important. As I said, Abdurraheem, we haven't touched upon so many areas that we could proceed into around identity, okay? And the importance of us being articulate and effective in voicing our positions, our beliefs regarding identity as Muslims, first and foremost, and the ethnicities that we hold, and the gender that we are. Okay, my son showed me a form only this week where when it's asking what gender he is, got male in brackets, trans, including trans male, female in brackets, including trans female. Then when you get to religion, it asks the question subjectively, what do you claim to follow of faith? And then it gives those. So it's consigned faith to a very superfluous element, but it includes with male a definitive statement of a relatively new gender identification, so-called gender identification. And you have to complete these forms. And now there's consideration. I've been speaking to others and said, I'm going to write prefer not to say. Okay, religion, Islam, obviously, but prefer not to say. Because in
You can
saying,
still prefer not to say on a form if you want to. It's not you're not denying being a Muslim. I don't really want you to know. Mind
there
your
you
own
go.
fucking business.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, but in not completing forms, as you know, there's a categorization.
What's your name? Prefer not to say.
Yeah.
What's your address? Prefer not to say. What's your telephone number? Nah, prefer not to say. Everything. Just who are you? I prefer not to say. I identify as not being anybody that you should take
I
notice.
don't exist. I don't exist.
To you, I don't exist. I
Exactly.
exist to who I want to, but not to you.
Yeah.
So
I think that where we are with this issue of identity, we're going to have to discuss it in a future podcast from a different perspective. There's so much to cover here, but I think one of the things that I want to conclude with is that with us as Muslims, and not only us as Muslims, there are going to be non-Muslims there as well who will agree with this. We have to be certain of identities that we had from birth, that have been there historically, And we should not be ashamed or cowed to highlight that. And in highlighting that and being confident about that, we're not diminishing anything else than the narratives that are taking place there. But who and what we are, we must be certain about. And I want to repeat that. I'm not talking about anyone else. People, oh, they were talking about transgender and they were casting. No, no. Leave that to the side. For our brothers, sisters, viewers who are here, non-Muslim as well, we should be certain of who and what we are. If there are areas about nationality, ethnicity, do I identify as a Brit or do I Afropean or whatever? Issa Dow was saying, I identify as a rich Muslim man. I'm heading to the banks. MashaAllah, see a rich Muslim man, and you're and rich in Iman as well, brother Issa. So that's what we must be certain of who we are. And we must instill that in our children. We don't have to get into the wider debate, but we need to be certain of who we are. And our religion shows us that. Biologically, we know that. Physiologically, we know that. There's nothing new that suddenly come in that will throw all of that certain knowledge, yes, the Ayn al-Yaqeen, the Ilm al-Yaqeen, the Haqq al-Yaqeen. Allah speaks about these 3 levels in the Quran. We should have that around fundamental elements of our identity. And if we have those 3 levels of certainty, nothing's going to shake that, no matter if it's a society that's against us, an ideology that says we must be upon that, anything that's marginalizing us, we have those levels of certainty and we must be confident in them. And I'll hand over to you,
bro.
Well, yeah.
Nothing to add to that, bro. That's a great conclusion. I think that's a great discussion we had. Alhamdulillah, we covered so many interesting things. I think there's food for thought. I think the one thing that I do think that needs to be discussed, maybe not now, is I do believe this has to be resisted. I think this trend has to be resisted. We should not give into it. And you know, the example of the 6'2" male swimmer that someone gave, who full male genitalia, was walking around with it swinging around in the women's changing room. How on earth did those women, why didn't they just walk out? Just walk out. I say that, obviously, I know you've been training, 20 years of your life and whatever, but you have to do that. People just have to say no. If they just say no and they just say no, swim on your own, then we're not going to be part of this. And this is the thing. What shocks me is why people, they don't even have the courage or the conviction to even do that.
It's fear, Abdurraheem, as well. Fear.
Yeah.
There is
I don't
fear.
know. You're an athlete. All the stuff you have to do, all the fear you have to overcome, everything you have to do to train to be an athlete, and you can't even stand up for yourself when it comes to something like this. And everyone's suffering. All of those women, you trained all 20 years to be beaten by a man, because and so what? You've won nothing. What have you achieved then? Right? What's going to happen to your sport? People just need to say no. If this guy is here, we're out. He can race on his own. And if everyone starts doing that, if you're a midwife, you can't call a woman, and you have to call her a birthing person. Just refuse. Find another job. Everyone needs to do it. They just say no. They can't. If everyone stood up, what are they going to do? If everyone just stood up and said, no, I'm not taking this, what are they going to do? They only do it because you all conform. Right? And the crazy thing is, you think that by conforming, you're going to save yourself. You're not, because you're on the way out anyway. AI is going to replace most of you. So you might as well just stand up.
That's another subject. AI is a totally different subject as well, from a point of identity. And I think, no, let's conclude on that, Abdurraheem. It has been really good discussion. And I want to thank everyone. We haven't been able to address all of the points that you've made, but you've made some really insightful comments and participated with them. Thank you for that. Jazakallah khair.
Yes.
And we will see you next week. We will discuss after the show, or the next occasion. Good. Still use woman, the Muslim midwife. Thank you. Jazakallah khair to you. Because a woman is a woman is a woman. Okay. And what we will do is decide if we're going to continue this conversation next week from a different angle. Contact us. Thank you, Reactionary. Wa alaikum salam. And contact Stream Islam if you'd like this conversation to continue next week. There are so many angles to come from. And we should be proud, honored, humbled that Allah has guided us to Islam and we know who we are. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.